Welcome to Biz TV Canada. I'm your host, David Wojcik. Women have been clamoring for equality since the beginning of time. But what is equality? Equal pay for equal work? Okay, we get that. But that applies for everyone. Women want more. More representation in the executive suite, more representation around the boardroom table, more representation in government. Well, finally an author has written a book about how to get there. We sat down with Lynn Harris to discuss her book, Unwritten Rules, today on Biz TV Canada. The book Unwritten Rules by author Lynn Harris is not a slam against men, nor is it another feminist trying to force her way into the man's world. Lynn Harris is a practical executive coach that asked the question, what was holding women back from achieving their goals of reaching the C-suite?
Well, I've worked in leadership development for many years, so I'm very interested in organisations, the way they work. I'm very interested in leadership. I've coached and facilitated in organisations for a long time. And of course, what I noticed was that there were very few women at the top of organisations. So I work predominantly with men because I work predominantly at the top of organisations. And I kept being told that eventually we would see more women at the top of organisations, and I noticed it just wasn't happening. We were not getting women. So I became intrigued by that and decided to research. I spent a year researching, trying to answer the question just for myself really, why aren't there more women at the top of organisations? It seems ridiculous in this day and age, in our modern society with so many competent women, when women are coming out of universities with higher numbers of degrees than men, all of those things, what's happening? So I spent a year researching it, answered the question for myself, and I thought it would be something that other people would benefit from and be interested as well. And I do have a passion for getting more women in positions of leadership. I think it's good for business, I think it's good for government, I think it's good for any institution to have diversity, and of course gender is only one aspect of diversity. And I think it's good to have more diversity. I think it's really poor that we have most of our organisations being led by white middle-aged men. The unwritten rules are things that, ways of leading in organisations that are there, they're in the ether, but we don't tend to talk about them. So that's why they're unwritten. So we all know that they're there, we all know that to be a leader you have to comply to these rules, but they don't tend to be things that you'll be asked for at interview. So for example, one of the unwritten rules that I talk about is availability anytime, anywhere, 24/7. So when you get interviewed for a job, they don't generally say to you, well, sign here now, you are now going to be available 24/7, but we all know that senior leaders are expected to be available that amount of time. So the unwritten rules are things that we know that leaders have to comply with to become leaders in organisations, but they don't tend to be necessarily out there in the open and spoken about. Well, it's an interesting question, because when women say what they want, it's generally considered to be socially unacceptable behaviour. Women are generally conditioned to not go around saying what they want, and then when they do, they get criticised for things like whining. So if you look what happened to Hillary Clinton, for example, when she exhibited the same sort of behaviours that the male leaders around her exhibited, then she was accused of all sorts of things, whining being one of them. So I think that's one of the interesting things about the leadership model we have at the moment, is that when men and women exhibit the same behaviours, like saying, this is what I want, for men often it's interpreted as good solid leadership behaviour and what we'd expect. When women do it, then one of the things they might be accused of is whining, or sometimes they're accused of being too aggressive. So I think one of the interesting things that we have at the moment, which is this bias around how men should behave and how women should behave, and I think we need to look at our leadership model to think about, okay, what do we want in our leaders, and what's wrong with women saying what is it they want. Yeah, of course competence should play the predominant role, and no woman would want to be on an executive committee or a board to make up numbers or to make up a quota. To think that we would even promote women just because they're women and not competent is ridiculous. I think any organisation would be wise to have a diversity strategy, to think about what talent they need, how they get representation in their senior leadership from all of their key stakeholders. So if your stakeholders are diverse, then your board and your executive committee would do well to be diverse. So I think it goes from rather than setting a rule of we need this much percentage of everything, it's more like let's look at our business, let's look at how our strategy aligns with diversity and what would really serve this business well, and then go from there. Because I agree with you, it can get a bit unwieldy. Well, yeah, I mean, one of the unwritten rules that I talk about is that what we value is a linear career path. And so if you look at most senior leaders, they haven't had any time out. And again, you know, so when did it become a great idea that leaders should just put their head down and go through their career in a very linear fashion and not actually get experiences elsewhere? I know for myself that when I left a leadership role and went off to become a mother and I took a year out, I know that experience changed me and made me a very different person, I think, and a much better person when I went back into the workforce in terms of my whole orientation to people, the skills I'd learned. So, you know, who's not to say that I'm all for changing the whole leadership model. I think it'd be great for men to have time out doing something, as well as women having time out doing something else, whether it be starting a family or something else. I don't think personally it's a great idea that our leaders, you know, left university, put their head down and went straight through in a linear fashion. I don't think that makes the best leader. There are the number of different things that women can do. Things like doing due diligence on the organisation. And first of all, getting themselves into an organisation where they at least have a chance to succeed, to develop networking skills, to get mentors and sponsors within an organisation, to learn to influence in a way that allows them to maintain their authenticity and to get what they want. That's a tough one. And so to be really fluent in a number of influencing skills that enable them to be themselves and to influence in what at the moment is a very male-dominated environment. So I think there's a number of different things women can do for themselves. I think they can also stop putting up with some stuff that they're putting up with at the moment. Well, the 8 influence behaviours are basically 4 assertive skills and 4 responsive skills. So 4 skills on the side of the model that I use, which is about how do you persuade, how do you make proposals backed up with logical reasoning, how do you say what you want, how do you negotiate, those types of skills. And they tend to be skills that are very valued by our leaders. We like our leaders for some reason to be competitive, to be pushing, to be able to say what they want. On the other side of the model, you've got responsive skills, which are about listening, asking good questions, finding common ground, building a vision for the future that people want to follow. Again, key leadership skills. Now, I don't think that it's the women can't do this. I think that when they do them, they get a different reaction. So when a woman is assertive and says what she wants, when a woman negotiates, when a woman promotes herself, it's somehow seen as not the sort of thing that women should do. Whereas when women listen and ask questions and are responsive, then that fits the mould. The trouble is, unless they can do both, they won't be taken seriously as leaders. They need to be able to do what I call the push skills, the assertive skills as well, but they need to be able to do them in a way that doesn't alienate people, which is a really tough call. Because when women are assertive and they're direct and they're straight and they say what they want, often they're judged by other men and women as being, I don't know if I can say bitch, can I? as being some sort of dragon lady or bitch. So it's also about changing our perception of what's acceptable leadership behaviour. Hillary Clinton talked about this when she was running for the Democratic nomination, and she said, you know, hopefully we're moving into a time when the range of acceptable behaviours for women is broadening. And so I think women have to be, I think all leaders have to be skillful across those 8 behaviours. I think women have to be even more skillful because of the bias we have around what's acceptable for women and how that fits with a male leadership model. You know, men and women are both emotional. We just show it in different ways. So stereotypically at work, when women get emotional, they cry. Stereotypically, when men get emotional, they thump the table and shout. I don't quite see how one is any better than the other. One of the things I talk about in the influence behaviours is about how do you take the feelings that you have and use them in a very constructive way without getting into the emotion itself. So I don't think it's helpful for men to thump the table and shout or for women to cry. It happens, we're human beings, we do get emotional, but the real skillful leaders, I think, take the things they're feeling and use those feelings in a way that's very influential without getting into the emotion, without getting angry or without getting tearful. And that's the real development, I think, for people. And so what? I mean, so what if Hillary Clinton almost cried in one of her interviews? I mean, she never actually did. I mean, the current Speaker of the House in the United States is a guy who's cried on many occasions on camera, and he's ridiculed for it. So I think, we're human beings, we get emotional. I think good leaders manage to use those emotions in a very influential and constructive way rather than a negative way. I think if it comes naturally to be one of the boys, then that's fine. I mean, when I was a leader in an organisation, I'm a huge hockey fan, for example. I mix very well with men, I get on well. So for me, becoming one of the boys was actually very easy. It wasn't something I put on. So if being authentically yourself is that you find it very easy to be one of the boys, then do it, go for it. Go and play golf with them, go and drink at the bars. If that's not your style, then I wouldn't recommend it, which does cause a challenge, because if that's the way business is done, if that's the way connections are made. So I think women have to find other ways and they have to take the initiative. So I meet a lot of women who complain that, we're not invited out by the men, or if we are, it's the hockey game or whatever. What I coach them to do is say, okay, so what can you do to take the initiative to invite the men? What would work for you? Would it be to invite somebody for breakfast or for lunch? What do you enjoy doing that you could invite men to join you? So rather than sit and complain about not being part of the boys' club, create your own club and invite them in. So what I'm saying in the book is, for women, in a way, they do have to change, that they have to become very skillful in the skills that I talk about there in order to make it within the current environment. So I'm not saying that women don't have to change. I'm saying they have to really skill themselves up, be very aware of what they're up against in organisations at the moment, and know what they have to be good at. And at the same time, not sell themselves out, not become like a man, because then we lose all the benefits of having gender diversity. If we get women to the top and they behave just like men, we might as well have just had all men there. In terms of asking men to change, I'm really looking at asking organisations to look at what's happening in your organisation at the moment that you're not getting more women to the top. So it's more about organisational to change, and of course for organisation to change, behaviour has to change, both male and female. So we're looking at how do we behave at the moment, what biases, what stereotypes do we have in play at the moment, what are the mindsets that might be limiting us, both men and women, because just as many women maybe again have the same sort of biases and stereotypes around leadership. So I'm looking at change the positive thing for the people within it and for the organisation, not picking on just men have to change. I think it's important for any leader to have a mentor or coach. What we're finding at the moment is that mentorship isn't enough to get women up the organisation. So what we've found looking at the studies is that where men do particularly well in terms of career progression around mentorship is when their mentors also become sponsors. So they sponsor them in the organisation, they speak for them. Women, what we seem to put in place is a lot of mentoring programs for women, but they're not sponsoring the women. So that's where the difference has been between men and women. So all men and women need mentors, all men and women need sponsors if they're going to progress within their organisation. I think there are actually more similarities between men and women than there are differences. I mean, there are absolutely key differences, but there are so many similarities, and it's a spectrum, If you look at what was stereotypically male behaviour and female behaviour, and then you did a scatter graph along there and you plotted people on it, you'd find men who have a very strong female side, women who have a strong male side, and lots of people in between. It's much more, I think, about how we stereotype people, and then we have expectations around how they should behave, and we don't accept the range of behaviours with men and women. So I think there are enough similarities between men and women that we can work this out.